Aloha and welcome to another episode of Sustainable Hawaii. I'm your host, Hunter Heaivilin, and today we're talking about education and sustainability, coordinating and cultivating a culture of change. We're joined by Dr. Debbie Millikan, the Sustainability Specialist at Iolani School. And thank you for joining us here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And so I wanted to bring you in today. Over the past few years and sort of rising tide of interest in sustainability overall, a number of institutions have created these sustainability coordinator or specialist positions. And it's been a lovely thing to see, but I understand that there's certainly a lot entailed with that, where you're trying to cultivate change, everywhere from the classroom to the boardroom. And glad you were able to steal away for part of the day to join us.
Of course.
So tell us a little bit. I mean, how did you get into this field, or what brought an interest of sustainability into your world?
Well, Hunter, I think it really started when I was young, actually. But I was also very interested in science, and so I became a scientist. And I studied the ocean. I studied hydrothermal vent tube worms in the ocean, strangely enough.
So that was microbiology?
That was microbiology,
Yeah.
That's right. So my specialty is in bacterial invertebrate symbiosis. Those bacteria that live with an invertebrate host. I came to Hawaii to study the Hawaiian bobtail squid called Euprymna scolopes. The bacteria provide light for the squid so that they can use that light in communication or as a camouflage at night when they forage to avoid predators. But the reason why those systems were so important is because they were a model for human bacterial symbiosis. So we have bacteria in our guts. You didn't know about that, did you?
I'm familiar with sort of the human biome and the various projects starting to work with that. But
right, we have more bacteria than we do our own cells.
Mm-hmm.
And so these invertebrate systems become models for that, because it's really hard for me to take Hunter and strip you of all your microbes and say, how important are those? Yeah. So we use these smaller systems, I guess, or simpler systems to try to understand. And it turns out the same mechanisms are at play. The bacteria communicate almost in the same way with these invertebrate hosts, similar to... Okay, so we'll fast forward.
Wait, so just to clarify that one bit. So there are light-emitting bacteria that are facilitating somehow the invertebrate activities or their ability to feed or...
Well, I think the light-emitting component is somewhat of a byproduct for the bacteria, but for the host, the squid in this case, they use that light. They use it much like our eyes can use a lens to open and close to see light. They use a lens that opens and closes when they want to shine light. It's pretty sophisticated, actually, for a squid. But the bacteria get obviously the nurturing environment and the food provided to them, so they're happy. They get to live in this little light organ and make light all day long.
So then, I guess, in working from the pattern of symbiosis and positive interactions between different sort of elements in an ecology, that then brought you into sustainability? Or
so maybe that's why that was attractive to me, was that idea of interdependent relationships, because that really is a lot of the basis for sustainability, really. But what happened was, in addition to being a scientist, I also became a mom. And so I started to see things a little bit differently with children, looking a little further in the future, but also drawing upon just my experiences as a child, sort of seeing things happen very quickly. The introduction of disposable plastics is one example, without really having the opportunity to question that or think critically. And so I felt like I was quite sheltered as a child. And when that realization came about, college, graduate school, I realized I wanted to do something about that. And what that really means is making sure that young children are educated, are aware of what's going on in the world around them, right? Not so much protected, and then empowering them to do something about it, to be change makers, to be peacemakers.
So, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, about sort of you were asking about the questioning of why has this not been addressed earlier, particularly just taking single-use plastics as an example. And my thought on it was that it takes sort of time for this knowledge to reach a certain kind of critical mass in society, after which, it is almost like a faux pas in many circles, if not all, to be engaging with, our environment in certain ways. And in the same way, I think that there have been different shifts where, like, culturally, whatnot, where something is recognized by some portion of the society as being a social ill or an environmental ill, but it may take some time, or even a health issue, taking just like smoking, for example, like that some people knew, not everyone did, and it was culturally acceptable. But then over time, as information grows, it sort of becomes this. It's like, what are you doing with yourself?
Right.
And so I think, for me, it's been really neat in the past few years to see this growth of interest, even though at some points topical and in others holistic. Of how do we address sustainability as a cultural practice? And so I really wanted to hear. So you made this jump from scientist mom into what? Or what was your sort of entry point into this world?
So the entry point really was actually preschool. When my kids were in preschool, I was still a scientist, but I saw a need. I saw this focus on these young children learning the alphabet or learning these very academic skills early on. And while that's important, of course, to prepare these young children for elementary school, I think at the same time, they could be engaged, or they already were essentially innately engaged to, let's say, the land. Kids love to dig in the dirt, right? They love digging in soil and planting things. So why not continue to foster that and nurture that interest? And of course, by doing that, you expose them to all sorts of creativity and wonder and awe, and those are the things that in education are really important as they progress through education, so that they don't just become some sort of robot that can regurgitate information, but they're actually thinking, right, and being curious. And so that's where that started. And so at my son's preschool, even though I had this job as a scientist, I asked, would it be okay to come in and help build up the gardens? And they said, sure. And so I started there. And then as he went on to elementary school, he started at Waikiki School, public school that you know well. And same thing, I came and said, we have an opportunity, we have space on this campus, let's build some gardens, let's get these kids interested in the soil, digging in the aina, growing some food. And that's where that started. So it started I started as a volunteer initially, and then kind of created the position for the school. And you're right, Hunter, earlier you said how exciting it is right now that we have these sustainability coordinators. But really, when you look at them, they are positions that were either created by those individuals, or maybe one or two individuals who saw the need. And I think of it a lot as what happened. I mean, many people have mentioned this about what happened with computers 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I might have the numbers wrong, but we didn't have computer technologists.
There wasn't
schools.
an IT department
Exactly.
at every school, but now it's viewed as a sort of a critical component, not just of communication, but also of education.
Right. So that's where I see these positions going.
Right.
They'll become more common.
And so at Waikiki, I know that there had been a connection with the Kokua Foundation's Aina in Schools school garden programming, but you really took it beyond the garden boxes there and developed the Waikiki food farm.
Right, so I got a little, I think it was a perfect storm of optimistic situation in that we have an amazing principal at Waikiki School who was very forward-thinking and saw early on the benefits to her children and how it tied in well to the other philosophies of the school, which are a mindfulness philosophy. They use habits of mind. And then we also have a program called Philosophy for Children where the kids are questioning. And so they're used to that questioning. So it was really an easy transition for them to then start to talk about food issues or energy or even waste issues, all issues that are important to sustainability. Their thinking was already there, their ability to expand on others' ideas and really engage in those conversations was simple.
So this is like a Socratic dialoguing approach to sustainability for kindergartners?
Okay, maybe not.
I
Sorry.
mean, which
I just jumped a little far.
No, but I think, having worked with you guys somewhat over the years, I mean, it is interesting because it's very different from sort of other pedagogical approaches where it's like, hey, here's information, remember it, it's going to be on the test, versus what do you see going on here, or the sort of like leading questions and whatnot. And
well, we both have experienced that, and that's pretty clear. You do the latter pedagogical method that you mentioned, and the kids aren't engaged, right? They're not. But if you come to them with a question, actually just yesterday I asked actually it came about, and I think, I'm not even sure who asked the questions, me or the students, is the ability to grow your own food a human right? So those...
It's a pretty deep question there, yeah.
Yeah, and within, a few minutes of having that discussion, can we go out to the garden? So I think if the other approach that you mentioned is, well, a plant has 5-6 parts, and here's the roots, and here's the stems, you really think, I don't know.
Yeah, you're not necessarily considering innate rights of being a living being.
Right.
So with Waikiki Food Farm, I mean, I know that I want to toot your horn here a little bit. So you guys have implemented an orchard. There was then, I believe,
That's right.
a peace garden that was involved.
That's right.
There was a nursery space and a sort of a market garden scale productive
That's correct.
productive area. So how did some of those come about, or how did you pitch? How do you pitch these ideas to an institution that's obviously not inherently directed towards food production?
We did slowly and carefully, and you bake cookies. Just kidding. So with the kindergartners, the buy-in there from the teachers was we wanted to create a rainbow garden. Yes, they're teaching colors, but it's more than just the colors. I mean, it tied into nutrition, it tied into the botany of the plants, because while an eggplant is purple and it's a fruit, carrots are roots and they're orange. So, you know, we had a few things going there that we could play into, right, to get them more engaged. So the first garden was a rainbow garden, and we involved the families by asking them to come out on a work day. We had a great response. We came out, we dug up the ground, the grass that was growing there, and put in this space that we had a lot of family commitment. So that's another key piece to what happened at Waikiki. So having that community involvement was key. Early on, families at the school. Later on, community organizations like Kokua Hawaii Foundation that you mentioned, and some of our local businesses that we partnered with. But initially it was the families and the school, and we had our teachers out there. Right after that same year, I should tell you a little bit about my sister who's in San Diego and who was paralleling what I was doing at Waikiki.
Really?
But at her, because our kids were born a week apart, so we were quite competitive in a fun way. And Terry said, she called me one day and she said, "Hey, I just got this Fruit Tree Planting Foundation grant. You should get it." And I said, "Okay." And so that's where the fruit trees came about. So I applied for this grant, and they said, "We would love to come to Hawaii. Can you find us another school?" So we encouraged Wailua to do the same program, so we did. So they came out and helped us plant a total of 90 fruit trees.
Wow.
So 60 of them came onto our campus. That's how that started. That one was a big rocker for the school and the DOE system, because while there isn't a formal policy that's been cited about fruit trees, there have been discussions about them on campus, and some of the issues that one might gather are thorns or kids climbing in trees. But one of my favorite was, well, are kids really going to understand, because it's going to take so long for the fruit to be harvestable? So that was an interesting one. So we went ahead and were able to address their concerns and plant the fruit trees. And then from there, it just
I think you guys have
so.
essentially the most vast orchard of
Well, it's quite
any of the
productive,
schools
and I
on
don't
the
think
island,
many
from
people
what
know
I'm
about it.
aware
So.
of.
Oh, well,
Right? I
I
can't think of any other schools that have an orchard quite like that going.
we're catching up at Iolani.
Nice. So you were able to bring in, I mean, it seems like a critical aspect of this is, one, it's sort of like building that internal support with teachers, students, parents, and sort of the explicit school community. And then one of the aspects of continuation is trying to draw in some of these external partnerships that'll help facilitate the development, as well as being, I think, to some degree, a mechanism of accountability for the school to continue these things going, where it's like, hey, we've invested in this, we've literally put trees in the ground with you, we'd like to see those continue to prosper.
Interesting you bring that up, because I ran into one of the UH professors who helped us that day to plant those trees just the other day, and so they do check up on it regularly, and we can't just let that orchard go now. The community has been involved.
So you're not in that position anymore, right? So it's transitioned, but it seems I think one of the things that I really have appreciated how you've gone about this is that there's essentially a succession plan that you would help set up, because taking it from a very informal, like, volunteer position to formalizing it, to even formalizing it beyond your presence, which is very spectacular. And
Let's hope it continues.
And I believe it's, I mean, it seems like part of it is that it's now encultured in the school. Like, it is seen as a bright spot, as something that is proudly displayed even.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, actually that is one thing that I don't necessarily want to say is unique to Waikiki School, but to other school programs like that. Once you embed it into the curriculum, it really helps, right? So it's not seen as just this external extracurricular activity, but it's actually within the classroom activities.
Nice. Well, we're going to take a quick break. So embed yourself into these brief messages and join us here afterwards.
Hi, aloha. My name is Chris Latham, and I host a show called The Economy and You. The show plays every Wednesday at noon, and on my show, I bring on guests who are interested or working in the technology space. And so I'd like you to come and watch the show and learn with me about all the sort of exciting things that we're doing in Hawaii to build and grow our economy ecosystem. So I'd like to say aloha, and I look forward to seeing you on the show. Thank you.
Aloha, Yappers. This is your host, Kingsley, for the Yap Show. Every Friday, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You can catch us here live, Think Tech Hawaii, and then later on, we upload to our YouTube channel. We talk about youth issues, policies, youth programs, and how to transition yourself into adulthood.
But this was like a sign, I guess. Hey, life's like, hey,
Right.
now's your chance to go back to school, which I'm doing.
Catch us here again live, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. Aloha.
All right, aloha and welcome back to Sustainable Hawaii. I'm your host, Hunter Heaivilin. Today we're talking about education and sustainability, coordinating a culture of change. And we're joined by Dr. Debbie Millikan, the sustainability specialist at Iolani School. And we were just talking about some of your prior work with Waikiki Elementary and developing a spectacular suite of programming there that's weaving together sort of a social engagement and both internally and externally, as well as some of these implementation of actual practices and solutions. And I know from speaking with you briefly beforehand that begins to get to sort of your broader approach in terms of framing sustainability. Like what does that look like to you, and how do you attack the problem?
So framing it is tricky, and I've evolved in my ideas and concepts, but I think where I'm at right now, and this is a broader generalization of sustainability globally, perhaps, and so that is, we can look at what's happening with climate change and with food security and food agricultural systems all over the world, and try to create political will and technical solutions, but then there to me is a somewhat separate framework that needs to be involved, and that's that social engagement piece that I was talking to you about earlier. So when you take that down to the level of education and working in schools, I think the same thing applies, right? So of course, engaging our students in the conversation of sustainability, whether we're talking about energy or food or waste or water, really is framing it that way for them, and so it makes a lot of sense. Engaging them through empathy, if you will, and understanding how these systems affect others in the community, so that it's seen as, well, of course our trash goes to this landfill, but why is the landfill placed in this community? Right? So it's that aspect of it, and that does lead into social justice issues as well. And then of course the other piece of, well, how can we solve some of the problems that we are seeing today? You know?
Well, it sort of brings up these two very critical components. There's the actual practices or technologies or connections made between different sort of elements of a system, whether it's your waste management approach or whatnot. But then there's also very much the process or the who is doing it, how they're aligned, why they're doing it, and in which ways it is or isn't connected to other kinds of programming that really, I think there's sort of the sustainability of the practice, and then there's also the questions of, which we, I think, engage with a lot at schools, is the sustainability of the programming that's doing that practice.
Right.
And that both are really very critical components. And I really liked how you sort of opened it in terms of the way you think about it now. And I think that's something with a lot of sustainability professionals, is that there is this sort of consistent evolution and this willingness to have an adaptive approach that is taking in various feedback from the work that we've been involved with and amending our processes as a byproduct, as opposed to, like, I think fewer like, oh, well, sustainability, there's this one straight pathway and then somehow we're there.
Right.
We're done, we did it, we're sustainable.
Yeah.
So and I think that's a really critical aspect. So with your role at Iolani, how did that come about? What's your day, sort of day-to-day look like there, and then what are some of the programs?
So Iolani is a K-12 school. We have 1,800 students. And right now, I'm the only person who's dedicated to sustainability, but I think that's going to have to change so that we can broaden our approach on the campus. Right now, I like to think of it in somewhat three, I guess, chunks, and that is curriculum. So that's with our students in the classroom. What are they learning? How are they engaged in solving problems, whether it's on campus or larger, statewide or even globally? And then there's the facilities piece. So how is our campus becoming a model for sustainability, or is it? We have some photovoltaics on our rooftops, and they were put up there a number of years ago, but if you had asked most of the students on campus, I like to think before I got there, but if you'd asked them then, they wouldn't have known that they existed. And so part of my role is education about our facilities. How much water are we using? How much of our tuition is going to our electrical bill? That's kind of a big one, right? To think that we're using that much electricity is taking a chunk out of our family's tuitions.
So there's sort of these three components of curriculum engagement, facilities, and then
the third piece is that community engagement.
Community engagement, sort of communication beyond the, not to say the walls, but the
No, it is. It's
yeah. In some cases, the literal walls or fence.
Right.
In other cases, another one. So
the metaphorical.
So the metaphorical wall, yeah. So with that, I mean, I really like that approach because it very much ties with sort of what we were just getting at. Of there's this practices aspect, which I think is more of that sort of facilities, or in some cases is that. But there's a practice aspect of each of these as well as a process aspect. And then a lot of it is also just connecting probably things that were already in place, and then part of it's also trying to craft what the future is going to be. So to sort of break these down from the curriculum perspective, like how are you working towards that, or what does that look like?
So it looks very different at different grade levels, obviously. So I'll start with kindergarten. Getting kindergarten growing food has been the focus for them. But we've also done some classroom audits. So they're looking at their classroom and saying, is this light nurturing my learning environment, or is it interesting, right? They love using light meters. So that's one way, and the temperature in the room. So trying to look more at the environmental influences on their learning. And then also taking that to the outside. What can we do to expand our learning opportunities in the outdoor environment? Not just through gardening, but through our play areas. What are we engaged in? So we recently started a Kolea project. So we have kindergartners, first grade. Actually, that's K-12 program, so anyone on campus can participate. We've been really working with the younger kids, observing the Kolea, you know about the Kolea, migrates here from Alaska, spends 9 or 10 months, and then heads back. So it's an opening your eyes to our campus so it can be seen as a natural environment instead of just a walkway to get from one class to the next.
So sort of identifying the habitats or the habitat and the species that are occupying the campus, not just the kids and the...
Exactly, right.
Wow.
And then the idea there is leading into, well, what are our practices that we are doing that might be altering or affecting the habitat of the Kolea and its migration patterns? So we're setting up for our big fair, and I'm monitoring some of the birds that are on the baseball field where the tents are going up today. You know, that's something that we're doing to influence their migration. Are they ready to go? Have they eaten enough food before they migrate back to Alaska? Because we're sending them off, right? We've just taken over their habitat. I was actually thinking more about things that we apply to the grass, so pesticides or fertilizers, and how they might affect their food sources.
I think it's really interesting, I mean, to get kids, particularly at that young age level, beginning to be engaged with this notion of habitat. Not just from, I mean, there's this natural world portion, right? Or the broader world of the Kolea and other forms of life, but then also considering it sort of as their own habitat of within the classroom. It's sort of a really neat approach to get, and then also, I think, inevitably there becomes like threads that connect those two of like, wow, this is really just about like how do we create spaces that are habitable and that are, you know, providing in a way that is beneficial to whatever species is there.
Well, I certainly didn't come up with that, so much influence from the Edible Schoolyard in Berkeley, right? So that's a lot of their thinking. So I was going up, so that's K, 4th grade. Right now they're spending an entire semester planning, growing, and preparing a meal. So that's their goal in individual groups. And their gardens look great. They're already starting to harvest and get ready to prepare their dish. They need to prepare a dish. Moving on up, though, I'll just jump ahead. So this year was the first time that we taught a new course called Religion, Social Justice, and Sustainability. And so this is partly what's influenced my thinking on this social engagement piece. But even beyond that is looking at issues like social justice issues and how we need to pay attention to them. It's not just about managing our CO2 levels in the atmosphere. That there's more to it than that. So that's what's happening there. And then I co-teach a course with our head of school, Dr. Cottrell, and that's in applied renewable energy systems. So we're looking at energy modeling, renewable energy modeling for the state of Hawaii.
So that's well beyond the campus. I mean, so this is a course where you guys are coming up with like what would a renewable energy future look like, or what does that process entail?
Right. So the class looks at what are the energy needs of the state of Hawaii. So we have roughly 1.6 million people, or 1.7, depending on the number of visitors we have at any one time. And what are those energy needs, not just in terms of the lighting and powering our game consoles, but beyond that. So the energy that's needed to bring our food here.
Powering our television shows.
Our cars, television shows. Thank you. So all the rest of that. So taking that big chunk and saying, can we meet those energy needs through renewable energy alone in the state of Hawaii, and then mapping that out. So you want the answer? No.
I'm certainly, I mean, have you solved this? Is there, I mean.
So on the quick calculation side, the students, so these are juniors and seniors, but really smart juniors and seniors, and they, looks like we can meet the needs of maybe half of us. And so what that means is finding ways to become more efficient, to conserve, to grow more food locally so we can transport less or import less. So that's about where that's
And so that's, I mean, in terms of using renewables, that's using solar and wind, or
right, so
just one of those, or is there hydro, or what's
so we
the
investigated a number of them, but the three mains are solar, wind, and geothermal. Also hydroelectric, of course, plays in, and biomass, so we're already doing that with H-Power, and I'm missing, what's the best, the cold water,
Oh, the deep sea water.
Yes. Come back to me in a second.
Wow. So that's what, so we've now seen like the kids are working like within their classroom, and essentially the kindergartners are working in the classroom and on the campus, and then all the way up to in high school and seniors, they're doing, essentially conjecture for the state.
And a bunch of things in between.
Wow.
So finding where we can fit in, engaging them at every level if we can.
So that's on the curriculum end of things. So you're working with the teachers to help frame this curriculum. You're working with each of these classes in various ways. How about in terms of facilities? I mean, that's a lot of students. It's a relatively big campus. I mean, there's a lot of doings and movings and waterings and work being done there. How are you sort of approaching that?
So we tried, so this started with a sustainability club that started last year, and those are seniors, so grades 7 to 12. And we discussed first of all, we investigated what's going on our campus. We basically did a campus assessment. How much water are we using? What does that look like? How much electricity are we using? How much waste are we generating? And then we had a discussion about, well, what should we focus on first? And they wanted to have the theme last school year to be water. So we looked at water, and we looked into ways where we can reduce our water use on campus. We have a lot of lawn, and it's not a very sophisticated irrigation system. So we brought in an outside group who came in and put in water sensing devices into our grass. It's not up to working perfectly yet. It takes some time for these sorts of new technologies, but once it does, and it has already begun to save us water, but once it does, we're hoping to really cut down on our water use. The sensors can tell when the roots of the grasses have enough water and can override the irrigation timer system. Wow. So it can happen at 2 in the morning instead of having to have an actual physical plant individual come out and turn it off. So that was our focus last year. And then some other initiatives that have come through, oftentimes we're being asked or we're being approached. And so one of those most recently is through a partner with HECO, and that is to provide a battery backup system for when we hit over our peak load. And that has to do with rate calculations as well. So sometimes those initiatives involve students, and that one in particular has not yet, but it'd be nice if our facility initiatives involved our students so that they get to learn about those particular initiatives and why they're important, and they also have a voice on our campus.
And learn through doing, not just learning about it after the fact.
So jumping ahead, so this year the theme was waste. They chose waste, not very glamorous. We did a school-wide waste audit in the fall. so that everyone on campus could see how much waste we generate in a day, and it's a lot.
Well, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and learn a little bit more about the sort of community engagement aspect of things.
Here's the deal. I'm Jay Fidel. I'm the host of Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, which is the Energy Policy Forum's program on Wednesday. That's how we call Wednesday Energy Wednesday. We call it Energy Wednesday every Wednesday. Are you surprised? Okay, and we try to get guys like Jim Alberts here from Hawaiian Electric who can tell us what's really going on in energy. We want to be informed. It's so important. It's the most important initiative in our state. Clean energy is major, okay? And that's why we cover it on this show. That's the deal. What do you think, Sharon?
I think that's great. That's why we're here every Wednesday from 4 to 5, and we hope you all join us so we can hear people like Jim coming on our show and co-host Ray Starling from Hawaii Energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here today. You've seen this. You heard what she said. What do you think?
I think it's a tremendous opportunity for people to come together and talk about the issues. Oftentimes, there isn't a good forum to bring these key issues out into the public, and this is a tremendous way to go about it. And the activity of this show is essential to keep talking about energy because, as you said, it's such an essential part of our lives that we need to pay attention to it and we need to think about the future.
Okay, Ray, your turn.
Well, this is a special time in the history of Hawaii where we're making some pretty radical changes in the way we use energy and generate energy. And this show is the one place you can count on coming to every Wednesday and hearing something about the latest issues that are on the table, being discussed, that will affect us all going forward. So come join us, and if you have some ideas you want to share with us about energy, give us a call and let us know. We'll put you up here and let you talk for an hour. So come see us.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Jim. It's great to be, from Think Tank's point of view, it's great to have this show. We love the show. It's our most important show. So come around and listen to us 4 to 5 on Wednesday. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Aloha.
Aloha.
What?
Aloha, welcome back to Sustainable Hawaii. I'm Hunter Heaivilin. Today we're talking about education and sustainability, coordinating a culture of change with Dr. Debbie Millikan, the sustainability specialist at Iolani School. And so you were just telling us about some of the work with facilities and the last year's, I guess, was there an energy audit or rather a waste audit? And I know I did have the joy of parsing through the trash with some of your students some years back. But I think it was sort of building that out into a more, trying to get some deeper understanding of waste on campus. So what came as a byproduct of that?
So that the actual event itself was open to all teachers and students to bring during class time to come by. And so some teachers did that, brought their students, and those students, because they had that opportunity to hands-on, you know what it's like, you know, you're holding these different pieces of disgusting trash, it inspired them to do something. And so some of our 7th graders have used a design thinking project to come up with strategies to reduce some of the items that we find most commonly in our waste. And so they're going to be rolling those out pretty quick. It took us a little bit of a time, but they want to test them out before the end of the school year. And then the goal is to really push for them for next school year.
Nice.
This year was our test.
So sort of discuss the curriculum component, facilities, and then there's also this broader community engagement. So what are the ways that your role is working towards that?
So continue to maintain some of the partnerships that I had started before, but engaging with more partnerships. And one of the ways we do that is through some of the extracurricular clubs that I've been working with. One in particular was student started, and that's called the Grow to Give Club. And so these students love growing food, but they also see a food justice need in the community for those folks who are under-resourced for whatever reason and find it really difficult to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables. So they offer those as a way.
So they're growing things on campus and then distributing that through food banks or whatever mechanism to people who have.
So IHS has been a recipient a couple times. They prepare food on site for, I don't know, what is it again? 800.
A fair amount of people. Yeah.
A fair amount of people. And so the students in this club think, you know, why should they be eating canned goods? And that's a lot of what Food Bank offers too. Unfortunately, I mean, it makes it easier to store, of course, but we've been able to get them fresh produce the same day so they can prepare it.
Wow. So, I mean, it seems like there's, in a lot of this, there's a social or environmental justice component that you've kind of woven in, and I think that's sort of a critical aspect about trying to keep an awareness of those things, because I think in part, like when that's, if that's consistently in the back of your mind, it makes some of the barriers that may often be come up against, things that are viewed not as a stopping point, as more as just like a speed bump or a hurdle to be gotten over, because it's not just about like sort of your process or your sustainability in a sense, but more about this broader and this sort of like an accountability to the world at large.
Right.
And I know you had talked about sort of this no buts approach of what you see in the classroom compared to sort of I don't want to say the adult life, but the world as we age and experience it in a different way.
Yeah. So I think I mean, this is actually working with young children. Initially, I was shocked. Now it just seems normal. But when you talk to them or have them work through perhaps a whole system. So let's take that waste system as an example. It's not as if they say, but what else could we do with our trash but put it in a hole? Like, they don't do that. They're like, but that's ridiculous. I mean, that hole could have been a soccer field for us to play in, or it could be a school. So I think that maybe that's not the best example, but the idea or the thinking, or the way I see their thinking is that they're still connected innately to, call it sustainability. I mean, it must be, for humans, or for all animals for that matter, something innate. Otherwise, species wouldn't survive. I mean, I guess some species don't survive, but I think of it as something it's so easy for them to understand.
So,
and then somehow they lose it.
So do you think this is more about, I mean, because I wonder if this is just something that is very much, as I was saying earlier, like it's temporal. It's something that's almost inundated our culture at this point, or aspects of it. So in that way, it becomes almost very tightly woven into their experience of life. But that when you pair that with the sort of persistent questioning and like getting a feel for the world, that those two come together to form that, or do you believe this to have been something that is predates our eras?
Oh, that's really deep. I don't know. That's a tough.
Maybe you can ask the kid.
Yeah, I'm going to ask the kids that one. I'm going to ask the kids.
Because I'm definitely intrigued. I mean, is this something that we, I feel like there's often this exceptionalism that we put on our era, or that we put on our time of it being novel or unique, or this like critical nexus in development of things, which is always, I think, persistently true and persistently a little bit of personal hubris.
I don't know if this is it, but you had mentioned earlier about single-use plastics as an example, and you mentioned another example, and that is when humans in society find solutions to problems, sometimes that solution becomes another problem. Right? I think that's what you were talking about earlier, that idea. We're not so good at that, right? We bring in species to handle an invasive species, and sometimes it becomes the worst problem.
Our sordid history of biocontrols,
I wonder, and I'll have to test this, I think kids would think that through.
That there is some aspect of more of a systemic questioning, or is that something that's lost, or is that something that's been encultured? I guess that's my question. Anyway, so
I think we lose it because I think what happens, and I don't know when this happens. I think there's something that goes on at middle school because they tend to become more self-centered and focused on other issues. But I think at some point, as an adult, we see a lot more blocks in solutions, and I think kids have I don't want to call them simple, but they have less of that distraction or negative.
Sort of the field is wide, and there's a broader spectrum of opportunity. I've been thinking about this in the sense of, to what degree, I mean, I feel like when you're younger, that's like everything is possible to some degree.
Exactly.
And then over time,
Right.
path dependency knowledges even tether us to a certain
Right.
track
Right.
much more firmly. And in that way, I would think it's probably replicated out into a societal level where it's just the way things have been done, and we understand that understand that works, at least in whatever sufficient degree that it persists. Even if it's broken from a longer or broader perspective, it's at least still working for you right now. And so in that way, it becomes, change becomes harder to sort of enculture into.
Exactly.
Which
is hard.
Which is really what this comes down to, is like, how do we build a culture of practice in sustainability? And you articulated some of the ways, like sort of that community facilities
Right.
and curriculum, but there's also, this is done different ways in different schools, right?
Right. I think a school creates somewhat of a unique situation, and I think what you were alluding to earlier about adults and change and that being difficult, and we're set in our ways. We might be jaded, or we might have all these other ideas, or oftentimes the answer is it comes down to money, right? Whereas children don't have that. So the reason why I work with children is for that exact reason, because I think by keeping their open-mindedness and their questioning, if we can keep that going through higher education, I would hope, I think we might have a much brighter future.
So, and a lot of the way that you're approaching this now, I mean, you have this support from the school institution, but we were discussing a little bit about sort of like a top-down approach, right?
Right.
Where you're talking about a I mean, these aren't your words, but the beneficial dictator school head that's like just implementing change and sort of using that consolidation of power to influence things, and then the contrasting side being this very much like grassroots, where in some instances it's someone from the community, the school community, or outside of it, saying, hey, let's garden, let's address some of these things that I feel are to be important. And I don't know, from your experience, like what are the opportunities or the caveats with those two kind of approaches?
Yeah, so I get what you're saying. You're right. Schools have taken all different approaches, and it really does depend on that particular school's culture and its community and who's interested and who's involved. I can't necessarily say one is better than the other, but both seem to work as long as, I guess, as long as there are committed individuals. And so, yeah, your dictatorship type certainly would be fun at a lot of schools to be able to come in. And so maybe when we're thinking about public schools, that might even happen at the level of DOE statewide. Some of the facilities work can be done without really student input or even faculty teacher input. It can be something that can be handled statewide, and that could have to do with our food, our school lunch programs, or our waste programs, or lack thereof in schools. So, but at independent schools, it's a little different situation. At Iolani, what we are doing is much like what you mentioned about grassroots. So really coming in and trying to create this culture of, not just sustainability, but this culture of awareness, of empowerment, that we can do something to. For example, what we would like to have come up in the future is that Iolani becomes this school of sustainability in a way where we are reducing our impact on the environment, so that we can become zero carbon neutral, zero waste if we could. But having everyone involved in creating that so that students might be working on an energy team or a food team. How can we grow more food on campus? How can we reduce our energy needs or reduce the amount of water we're wasting? So there's a variety of approaches that can be taken, and I think it really depends on the school and the situation in the community. A lot of schools have parent involvement, and that's what happened at Waikiki, right, initially. So it really took the parents, including myself, to come in and ask for that change.
So it seems, I mean, I was going to sort of quiz you on a good first step, but I think that based off of what the sort of the picture that you painted is just that aspect of the simple bit of engagement of going and working with whatever aspect of the school or a school community that you're involved with, whether as a parent, a teacher, or just a community member, administrator, that sort of instituting some type of discussion. Or is there another sort of like succinct, pointed way forward that you would guide us towards?
I guess as an advice for a school, if that's what you're asking, is those who are interested in doing something would come together as a committee, create a plan, an action plan, even if it's a simple action plan for 1 year.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Once
you,
again,
Hunter.
Debbie Millikan, the Sustainability Specialist at Iolani School. I'm Hunter Heaivilin. Join us here every Thursday for Sustainable Hawaii, a show about making the transition from being individual consumers with responsibilities or with rights to building a community of producers with responsibilities. Aloha.